Hello.
Hello.
So, is it already time? We still have a couple of seconds, right? Let's give it a couple of more minutes or seconds.
Yes, for those who've already joined, just bear with us for a couple minutes as we add a few more people. Can revel in our sound checks.
With Michelle twice here. All right.
Hi.
Hello.
Hello. Good
Morning.
afternoon or morning.
Yeah, afternoon, evening.
Depending which time zone everyone is in.
We have two of you, Michelle.
Yes, I'm not sure why that's the case.
Multiple personality. Well, let me remove you.
I don't think I have. No, I don't have.
I've got the power here. All right.
Oh, okay.
Good morning from Canada's East Coast. All right, that's good. So we have Canada's East Coast. We have Lauren. Where are you now?
East Coast, north of Boston. So yes, we're spanning, I think, more than 9 hours of time zones, which is something.
This is really good. Good morning from South Africa. Wow, there you go. This is in Michelle. Where are you right now?
London. So
London. All right.
Another time zone.
Another time zone, and I'm calling from Berlin. So we're really a global audience, a global panel, global audience. Yeah, I'm looking forward to the.
and Pat and the SPIE crowd are calling in from Bellingham, Washington, so they get the early bird 8 a.m. there. So thank you for.
Yeah, I apologize if I doze off during this.
We'll try and keep it fast paced so that doesn't happen. Great. Well, I think we can slowly start to kick off. I'm sure a few more people will trickle in as in the next few minutes. But yeah, I'll just kind of give a very brief introduction to the discussion and the speakers. I'm Michelle and I work at Morressier, and we are one of the companies that is hosting this webinar in collaboration with Delta Think and SPIE. So we're very excited that you're all here. We're super excited to get this started and to have a really kind of fun, interesting discussion. And we want it to be very interactive. So we're looking forward to also hearing from all of you who are kind of watching this webinar. So yeah, I'll just give a very brief introduction to the speakers. They'll tell you a lot more about what they're doing as the discussion progresses. But firstly, we have Patrick here, Patrick Franzen. And he is the Publications and Platform Director at SPIE. For those of you who don't know SPIE, they are a not-for-profit professional society for optics and photonics technology, which is a mouthful. And then he is joined by Sami Benchekroun, who is the Managing Director of Morressier, which is where I'm obviously also working. And what we do is we have built a platform for early stage research, and we offer technology to digitize and increase the impact of academic conferences. And the two of them will discuss how they worked together on a strategy to really enhance the conference experience for all of SPIE's delegates, including both on-site and online, by building a kind of digital strategy around the conference research being shared at all the SPIE events. And this discussion will be moderated by Lauren, who is the CEO of Delta Think. And they are a consultancy that work with a number of different players in scholarly communications. So yeah, before we kick off, just a few bits of housekeeping. As I said at the beginning, we want this to be very interactive. We want to hear from you. We want to answer your questions. So we'd love it if you could just send any questions into the little chat box. I can see already a few people are writing in there. So just whenever it comes to you, please just send off a question. If it's in the middle of someone speaking, I'll kind of gather them as we go and then make sure at the end that we get to answer all those questions and the speakers can kind of speak to whatever you would like to know. And yeah, so the discussion will be roughly 30 minutes and then the Q&A at the end, probably about 20 minutes. And yeah, before we begin, we have one poll question that we'd love to get your input on, just so that we know a little bit more information about who is watching and what areas you're working in. That would be really helpful to guide the discussion as well. So yeah, I think, Sami, you'll set that live.
It's live, yeah, it's live.
Perfect. Okay, well then I think that's it for now. And Lauren, you can kick off the discussion. Thanks.
Great, thanks so much, Michelle. I'm happy to be here to kick this off. And as Michelle said, please do. We want this to be interactive. So questions, comments, thoughts for later, please just put them in the chat box. We all wish we could be doing this in person. And so we'll aim to have as much of that in-person experience as possible. So as Michelle said in the introduction, I'm Lauren Kane. I'm the CEO for Delta Think. Delta Think is a scholarly communications consultancy, and we're lucky to work with both SPIE and Morressier. And I can say that, you know, one of the most fun things about my position is when different groups that we work with really are able to collaborate in a mutually beneficial way. And this is definitely one of those partnerships. So really fun to be able to chat about the experience and share with you all today. So just to kind of kick off, Pat, why don't you start and just give us a little more background on SPIE?
Sure. So first of all, apologies for the tiger stripes. It's rare we get sun on the West Coast, and today happens to be one of those days. And I'm trying my hardest to avoid it, but for whatever reason, it seems to be impossible. So bear with me.
Very timely with Tiger King. So
exactly right. Exactly. It's very thematic. So yeah, I'm Pat Franzen. I'm the Director of Publications and Platform for SPIE. We are the International Society for Optics and Photonics, focused mostly on light-based science and light-based applications. We're a member society, have roughly 20,000 members worldwide, as well as about 250,000 constituents. So we cast a pretty broad, wide net. And as part of our program, we maintain the SPI Digital Library, which is our online database of research content. Currently, it includes about 520,000 publications spanning journals, ebooks, as well as a lot of conference materials. We also are a very conference-heavy society. And annually, we put on about 25 major events around the world. Some of them are very broad-based, some of them are very niche and focused on specific topical areas. But conferences are really the lifeblood of the society. And we are continually looking at ways to connect our conference experience with our digital library platform. And obviously today we'll talk about some of the new steps we're making in that direction.
Excellent, thank you. And Sami, would you mind doing the same, a little more information about Morressier from your perspective?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Sami, and I'm one of the founders of Morressier, and we have founded the company now 5 years ago, and the initial idea and the initial motivation of really creating Morressier was by working very, very closely with the academic conference world, and we very early realized that there's on the ground on site, there's a couple of experiences that are still a lot of paper, a lot of let's say manual processes. You see these holes of paper posters, you see people coming with a USB key, plugging it into a computer, and it seems like the conference experience is really something that only happens on these 3, 4, 5 day events. And what we have started to build is a set of tools and a couple of technology solutions around conferences to, on the one hand side, it really increase the experience on the conference with offering new digital possibilities, creating new types of workshops, creating new dialogue possibilities. But then on the other hand, also connecting the offline experience on the conference and connecting that with everything happening online. And that's what we have been doing now for large societies, for smaller societies. And the goal is really to connect the people meeting on the conference. So we're a strong believer in everything that happens during a conference. But we also believe that there must be some sort of a connection between the offline and the online worlds to actually bridge the gap. And that's what we've been doing since the last years. And we're very happy that we're now also working together with SPIE together in our mutual mission moving forward there.
Great. Now, Pat, you talked a little bit about the importance of conferences to SPIE, and I think that's true, both certainly before COVID, now in this kind of, a scary time, and then it will be true, long after. And I think that's one of the things that's really interesting about the partnership with Morressier is that this all happened, long before we were in this kind of climate. So I think that kind of speaks a little bit to how this is an idea that is important no matter what the environment is. So maybe you can kind of, speak a little bit about the initial impulse and where this partnership kind of originated.
Yeah, sure. So this partnership isn't reactionary. We were in the final stages of pulling everything together when COVID hit. But our plan all along was to implement this technology into our platform and into our conference experience, regardless of what the global situation was. So we actually started engaging with Morressier probably about 15 months ago in January of 2019, really picked up some speed towards the end of 2019. And then, we were actively making plans to integrate this into SPIE's conference experience in 2020. And, the reason for that is basically what Sami just touched upon is, again, we realize that the conference experience is generally pretty short-lived. And, there's huge demand for that material in a post-conference environment. We've been capturing conference material, whether it's proceeding papers or presentation recordings, for a long, long time. Poster content has always been kind of a challenge. And, what we saw in Morressier was a solution that was going to address that challenge and allow us to capture, thousands of posters annually and take them from, a ballroom in a convention center to a global audience. This has always been part of our strategy. The timing just happens to be somewhat fortuitous. And, we were able to jump the gun on a lot of other folks.
Great. What about from your perspective, Sami? Why was this partnership, such a good fit? Why did you see this as being kind of mutually beneficial to both organizations?
Yeah. So what we've seen in the past quite regularly is that conference world and the publishing world are somehow very much separate from one another in most societies and in most organizations that we talk to. In our experience that we've had, we have rarely really seen an organization where conference and publication is really thought through in one team, is has that very clearly that clear mission towards connecting conferences with publications elements and really enhancing everything around conference. So SPIE is one of those very, very, very few society that actually thinks a lot around conference. And I think that there's not only the idea of conference that is very important here and aligns both of us. It's more the notion of what is being presented on conference. We both very much agree that on conferences there's ideas that are being presented. There's early stage ideas, call it early stage or call it somehow preliminary ideas, processes that people just want to share and get a little bit of a feedback on. So what we believe is that conferences are actually one of the most important means to actually keep up to date, to keep the discussion flowing. And we both believe that that kind of discussion needs to be somehow elevated as well into the online world, into that whole world of publication. And I think that this is something that where we align very strongly.
Excellent. Now, we've talked a little bit about it for the partnership from kind of the high level and goals perspective, but let's give the audience a little bit of a feel for what this kind of implementation is actually going to look like. So perhaps you both can speak to a little bit about the workflow and how this will practically enhance the, when we are finally back in person conference experience.
Right. So yeah, we look at this as kind of a holistic solution. So if you look at the conference experience, there's kind of three phases. You got pre-conference, conference, and post-conference. And what Morressier allows us to do is actually capture posters and poster content pretty early in the process through a pretty simple submission system. Load that content into our conference app, and then make that content available to registered attendees prior to the conference. If anyone on the call has been to, a major conference with, many thousands of attendees, you can find that it gets pretty overwhelming pretty quick. And, walking into a poster session that has, 1,000 posters in just rows and rows and rows is somewhat daunting. So what we see is having the preview ability in the app will allow attendees to establish a game plan about what posters they want to see and who they want to interact with before actually setting foot on the ground. So again, we see that as being incredibly valuable to our attendees. On site, we're looking at a couple different solutions. So Morressier offers digital poster kiosks that allow us to display any number of posters in an electronic format that provide great interactivity for attendees. And, some part of our thinking is, it would be a great complement for the actual hard copy posters that we're all used to within the poster hall. But in many cases, what we see the value of these kiosks is bringing is being able to station them around the conference and allow folks to engage with posters without actually having to be at a poster session. If you've been to any SPIE conferences, I'm not sure who we have from the optics and photonics community on the phone, but several of our shows are staggered all over cities, multiple venues, multiple hotels, and we have a lot of competing events. So, we see these remote kiosks as a way to kind of ease the burden on researchers having to make sure that they make it to a poster session. They're able to engage with this content at their leisure from any number of spots within the conference. And then obviously post-conference, capturing that in the SPI Digital Library, making it available to the larger research community around the world, for us is a no-brainer. Part of the mission of the society is to disseminate content. The in-person conference experience allows us to disseminate content to a relatively select few. The digital library, takes that to the masses. So when we look at this, again, it's kind of a holistic solution that allows us to engage with a lot of different people in a lot of different formats.
That's fantastic. Well, Pat, you were quite the spokesperson, but Sami, is there anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I try to kind of visually undermine it. I try to look into a couple of screens that I have prepared here. So Pat mentioned in the very beginning these holes of posters. So I just want to show that again. I think visually it gets you in that feeling, right? It creates also this wish of getting back in the plane and getting back on the ground. But essentially, this is exactly how poster experience are they look like in the world, right? And I think that creating different types of experience and restructuring, doing some sort of hybrid elements, having paper poster, having digital opportunities. There's different ways of actually increasing the experience. So Pat has talked also about kiosks, just to give you a little bit of a feeling of how they look like, not to be too advertorial here, but just to give you a little bit of a feeling on how these digital sessions might look like. So interaction on a screen, little halls where a lot of early career researcher also with their poster get a much bigger audience, where there's more possibilities of really creating these small workshop sessions and so on and so forth. And then also distributing those documents around the venue. For now, halls have been just, all posters have been put into one hall, and I think the ability to actually put some posters, or even the entire collection on these kiosks around the venue, or even in venue hotels, I think that's a good advantage.
This is excellent. I keep looking at all these photos, and I have to say the first thing I think is they are definitely not 6 feet apart. And so I think I'll be thinking that for a while. Just taking a step back for a second, we've mentioned a few times this, and it's in the title of the webinar, early stage research. So that's a term that sometimes means different things to different people. What does early stage research practically mean to SPIE?
I actually don't use that term. For me, it's just research. I think early stage research kind of assumes that what's being presented will one day end up in a peer-reviewed journal. And I think particularly in our world, where we're very applied and we have a pretty strong industry presence, that's not always the case. So what I would prefer to say is, when you talk about conference material, yeah, undoubtedly some of it is going to mature and end up in a peer-reviewed journal that everyone in academia is familiar with. A lot of it, what's presented at the conference might be the end all. So this is just a way to actually capture as complete a record of what's happening at the conference and what that research is being presented as possible. So rather than, kind of say this is a precursor to what you can see as mature research later on down the line, I think it's more of a, complete picture of what's going on in a specific space or a specific community.
And on that score, I mean, obviously the posters is the key element that you're working with Morressier on, but in the fact with presentations and having a kind of digital complement to in-person presentations, that's something that SPIE has been doing through their digital library for quite some time. Is that right?
Yeah, we've been doing it since 2017. So,
and what
so
has,
yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead. Or just to say, what is the reaction to that, Ben, or what has, the aim of doing that for your community, Ben?
Yeah, I think it's, we've hit some home runs. We've struck it out too. What it does is it extends the conference. And, even if that presentation post-conference reaches 20, 50 people, it's an audience that didn't have the luxury of being there in person. What we've actually found is, as everything's moving into a virtual world, the early steps we've taken to capture presentation recordings has served us well. We actually have a digital event going on right now that was going to be located in France, and now it's online. And we're using that platform as a way to bring the conference experience online. And thus far, I mean, it's only been going for a couple of days, but the amount of interaction we've seen has been astronomical. So, as things shift due to, different constraints within the academic and conference world, I think having a flexible option is really important. And like I said, when we capture a journal article or proceedings paper, you're capturing the record of what was presented or what was happening in the lab. And, a recording or a poster does the same thing. It's just doing it in a different format.
Yeah. And just to kind of give a practical context to that, I think you mentioned to me in the online conference that's going on right now, and obviously everyone wishes that they could actually be in France doing the in-person experience. But the benefit is that some of these presentations that are put online that people are interacting with, what in person might have been, a few hundred people watching that presentation, I believe you said there were cases where they were getting thousands of hits.
Yeah, so we're, it opened a little early, but we are officially about 60 hours in, and I think we've got about 24,000 views across the whole program. So, I mean, yeah, it's kind of opening Pandora's box in that, the in-person program is obviously, the networking opportunities and whatnot are incredibly valuable, and you can't diminish those. But being online, you certainly reach a much bigger, broader audience. So,
and let's kind of hold that thought for when we get to the Q&A portion, because that would be something I think that's really interesting to hear from the audience about what people think about as the future of this and what the impact long term will be on conferences. I mean, I know I personally think that if they are not mutually exclusive, I think we are going to return to a kind of robust in-person conference schematic, and now more than ever, because we're going to be hungry for that in-person networking. But I think we will have learned the lessons from virtual opportunities that will also kind of persist into the future. But interested to hear from everyone, so kind of hold that thought for the end. But Sami, now kind of back to you here on this idea of early stage research, since that obviously was kind of a key part of Morressier's origin story and the reason why the company was founded. So what is that research to you, and why is it so critical that be made more accessible and visible?
Yeah, so it builds on top of what Pat already said. In our presentation, or when we are talking about early stage research, or when we are talking about everything that is before everything that is published out there, or being made accessible, there is years of research process. There's years of work that is going into trying to find that right solution, that right path. All the discussions that is happening right there is something that is so relevant and should be more relevant to the entire research community, right? But for now, it's really hidden, right? These 2, 3, 4 years of process that happens in the lab, right now, still on vastly offline held conferences, that element, this what we call early stage research, but I think just out of lack also for a better word, we strongly believe that all of that must be somehow made online and should be part of the entire research structure. So the vision and where we are going with that is, just imagine to have the first piece, the first idea in your research process in some way, be it a poster, be it a conference presentation, be it a proceeding. I think the format doesn't really matter. And then following on that path, having then the second poster presentation, having then the third documents, and then the fourth, until the final research is right there, and then we can connect the pieces. We can actually learn then from mistakes, and I think that is also a very, very relevant element. We've had numerous discussions with researchers that we support in uploading the posters and presentation onto our platform, that say, hey, we sometimes do not know what other researchers on the other side of the world are actually doing, and by visiting posters and presentations, they actually can start relationship with other people that are working on a similar topic, that have done a similar path. So it goes all in that direction of, on the one hand side, reproducibility, and on the other hand, also in this discussion on how can we actually accelerate processes by bringing people together much earlier. For now, conferences is really the way to go about that. But I think this virtual online component is just absolutely necessary to keep this conversation pre-publication ongoingly alive and really supporting it.
Yeah. Well, you touched on this a little bit, but I think it's an important point to bring up, especially since our audience has a number of researchers in it. So what do you see for both of you as, the key benefits to researchers, and especially for early career researchers, in sharing this type of conference content?
Yeah,
sure. So go ahead, Sami.
So maybe one brief comment on that. So what we, especially early career researcher, for them to get into the first, to get a first article into a journal, into a great journal, for them it's quite difficult because they don't have so much under the belt. They don't have really a portfolio of research they have already, that they can showcase. So in our experience and in all the conversations that we are having with researcher, to actually populate, for example, their ORCID ID with all posters and presentation that they are presenting on conference is highly relevant to just showcase the entire picture of their research activities. And for now, we do not really see posters and presentation, or especially posters and presentation, in all these, on all repositories or in all these very officially, structured platforms. And for early career researcher, we believe that this is a huge leap forward to actually, put them into one place and that they can actually showcase all their work very early on.
Great.
Yeah, so I think it actually benefits all researchers. If you're a tenured professor, chances are, your final research or the results of what you're doing in the lab are going to be published in a peer-reviewed journal. If you're the CTO of a company, I mean, what does a peer-reviewed journal matter to you? The conference outlet might be where you share your results. At that point, not only are you explaining, what your R&D team is doing, it's kind of an advertorial. And that, you're saying we're doing some cutting edge stuff. This is where we're headed. You might want to check us out. You might want to partner with us. So I think there's, a difference in terms of motivations here. I mean, I agree. I think for early career researchers, it's probably easier to get accepted into a conference program or have a poster published. But, when we look at this, I mean, I think you have to assume that it applies to everyone. And yeah, I mean, I think it's overall just an enormous benefit to all researchers. What we find at conferences is people are reporting on what's happening in their labs right then and there. A peer-reviewed paper is what happened in their lab a little while ago, right? So it's live science. You get a lot of information being shared about both positive and negative results. So I think, all the information that comes out of a conference program helps people build on successes and avoid pitfalls, and having all of that available moves science forward much faster than if it's not available.
Absolutely. So we've talked a lot about, why this is important kind of before COVID and why it will be important long after, but let's talk just for a minute about the situation that we are in today. And it's this idea of, many conferences, including, unfortunately, a few of SPIE's conferences have been canceled due to COVID-19. And there's this idea of kind of stranded scholarship of, scholarship, these posters, these presentations, this other conference content that if there is not a virtual option, basically just, ceases to be disseminated. So could you speak a little bit about, the situation that SPIE was in with its canceled conferences, and again, why you made the decisions to launch your online forums and, some of the benefits and challenges of that?
Yeah, so sure. So we're still treating each one as a unique case. Photonics Europe, which is what's happening right now, moves into a digital forum. We have 2 conferences coming up at the end of the month that will do the same. But our conferences that are a little further down or later in the year, June, we're trying to figure out what we're doing with those still. But yeah, I mean, the whole idea is, particularly now, is people need to get their research out as part of career advancement. And being able to provide some outlet for that, I think, is critical. We've seen groups like American Physical Society pull together a virtual solution pretty quickly. And I think that's the big thing, is making sure that, everyone in the world is working remote right now. Doesn't matter who you talk to, everyone's at home. And the fact that we find ourselves in this difficult position shouldn't mean that science comes to a stop. So we've got to find ways for people to get their research out, to share ideas. And, since the in-person experience, whether it's on campus, at work, at a conference, is, been put on pause for the time being, I think these virtual forums, whether it's, again, Zoom meetings or Microsoft Teams or, virtual conferences is, the best way to do that. And what we're finding is people are adapting. So it's not perfect, it's not seamless, but at least, we're moving things forward, in some fashion.
And Sami, what are you seeing or observing in the, specifically in the society market? Obviously, you've become a popular call these days when people's conferences are canceled. And in addition to SPIE, you have the exciting partnership with ACS for their large-scale meeting. What are you hearing from people about what their concerns are, what they're seeking, solutions for?
Yeah, so it's perfectly reflecting what Pat actually is saying about, and what you initially mentioned about stranded scholarship. I think that this is a very important notion right here, is the idea of not stopping a scholarly exchange, even though we are in this situation, right? I see it with great joy that people are actually now moving that fast, and that suddenly things are being actually looked at a much faster pace, right? So I don't want to sound cynical, but you see always these things on LinkedIn. Who actually was the driver for your digital strategy? Is it your CEO, your CTO, or is it COVID-19? So we see right now a lot of large societies to small societies or companies that really rethink their digital strategy. And I think in a post-COVID-19 world, nobody will ever doubt the fact that a digital strategy or some sort of digital elements to the offline world is highly necessary. So what we see in our and by now is really a daily request that we are getting from societies around the world. What we are hearing really most is, how can we do things fast? How can we do it now? How can we actually solve the problem and secure everything, all these conferences that are being cancelled now? And what my reaction to that is, so first of all, Morressier is a company that is not, is not made per default for COVID-19 times, but it, the conversations with society started way earlier, and the need for digital strategy is something that shouldn't be closely linked to COVID-19. I think COVID-19 gives us now yet another reason to say, and I'm saying it's just one other reason to actually say we need this strategy that actually increases the experience on site and connects it with everything online and put that research online. So again, so I always like to when we're talking to society to say, hey, we are happy to help with a short-term solution, but this is something where this is a more strategic thought. It shouldn't be just a separate thing thrown into the bucket, but something that is made for longer, for also the conferences when everything comes back to normal.
Well, one last question for you both, and then we will move to the many questions that are coming in through the chat, which is awesome. But first, to our speakers. So to you first, Pat. What do you see? What do you see as the future? Both in terms of potential changes, kind of coming out of the COVID-19 crisis, as well as just generally, changes to the research process over time. So asking you to kind of look into your crystal ball for a moment.
So conferences will be more hybrid. Again, there are some conferences, and I think everyone who's probably on this call right now goes to a bunch that are appropriate to transition into a virtual format, and there are those that aren't, that are really are focused on the ground networking experience along with talks. So I think, I think you'll see some conferences move into a virtual world, and I think you'll see some conferences that maintain their physical presence. So for the foreseeable future, I would say it'll be a hybrid. And what I think you might see is that some of the conferences that remain physical, also have a virtual element built into them. It's going to take a while for that to, to be achieved, I would say. There's a lot of experimentation that's going to have to happen. There's going to be, a lot of bumps along the way. But I think, if this situation's teaching anyone, all of us anything, it's patience. Every call I'm on, every meeting I'm in, right, there's something happens. So it's, I think the appetite for change will be there. And I think people will be willing to be patient as that change kind of evolves. I also think that you're going to see, we've already seen it with, some of the open science movements, the open access movements, the research paradigm's changing, how people share information's changing. This might accelerate it, and it might open other opportunities. So right now, I think it's really, really difficult to predict anything. I think the one thing we can say definitively is it's not going to go back to how it was. Something's changed, and we're just going to have to adapt and be agile and willing to embrace that change when it presents itself. So I think that's the biggest thing. My takeaway, and I think SPIE's takeaway in all of this is you can't be resistant to what's coming down the pipe. It's a reality. We might not like it, but it's what we have to live with, and we have to make sure that we're in a position to take advantage of those opportunities and avoid the challenges that'll be presented as we move forward.
Great, thank you. And what about to you, Sami? What do you see coming out of this into the near, or perhaps not so near future?
Yeah. So since this is recorded, and we let's look into 1 year and then see where we said today.
Exactly.
So let me do a bold statement right here and say I think that the conference landscape as it is will actually even increase. So I think that there's going to be large conferences are very necessary for networking, and I think that I completely agree to what Pat is saying. I think these large conferences will have some sort of a hybrid model, an online component, a digital strategy that they are bringing up. But I think in addition to that, we'll see much more smaller meetings, local meetings, regional local meetings that are going to happen for these short exchanges, because everywhere and all the people that I'm talking to is I'm missing that direct exchange. Let's meet somewhere, let's do that more often, and I think that that might encourage actually more types of smaller meetings. And also a digital component to that. So I think we'll just see a much higher variety and a much different set of meeting types that are going to emerge. But clear is that I think that all of these meeting types, no matter what kind of meetings type, there will be some sort of digital component, some sort of hybrid model involved. And I strongly hope that everybody realizes that we need to put conference output online and really make it accessible to a broader audience. So I hope that this will at least come as a result of that.
Yeah, so just to add one last comment too, because we really haven't touched upon it at all, and it's obviously a critical component to the conference experience. I think the exhibit side of conferences will get stronger as well. If there's one thing we're finding, there's really no good way to engage with groups offering new services, new products, right? You don't have those on-site demos. I think what we've found thus far is creating a virtual exhibition hall is very, very difficult. So, you might see more technical conferences move into a virtual format, but those that have a strong exhibit presence again, I think you'll see that the in-person experience just gets stronger because, you know, there's no way to replicate that at the moment.
I think that's a really good point. Well, thank you both so much for that conversation. And so we'll give you a chance to breathe for a moment while we go through some of these questions. And so I will try to go through the questions that have already come so far. But if you have additional questions, now is the time to put them in the chat box too. So the first question was about the kiosks. And I think Sami ended up showing a picture of those. Alexandra says, what Patrick just mentioned about the kiosks at conference sounds really interesting. What would that look like? Would love some more ideas. So maybe Sami, you could just pull up that slide again of what those, because I do think that's a really, really cool component of what this would bring to the in-person conference experience. So I don't know if you want to make any more comments about the benefits of those.
Yeah, so I think the main benefits, just briefly elaborated, I think, you know, putting posters also online, just maybe one, or putting posters in a digital format and giving researchers the possibility to actually digitally present those posters seem to actually increase the value of the type of presentation. So we see a lot of researchers being very, very happy that they're now being able to present from those kiosks. And I think what you see here in this very screen is that there's a huge opportunity to create new type of workshop scenarios, kind of discussion settings, if you have these digital components. So a very small workshop area in the registration area, maybe another type of discussion situation at a conference hotel. So, you know, different types of possibilities are possible with that. Yeah.
Excellent. And Samuel Cerna asks a question about language. And so this is interesting in terms of, I think, you know, is there a possibility for this content to be produced in multiple languages, or, you know, even, you know, whether it's initially or on the fly? You know, the digital conference, digital poster experience, what is the accommodation for languages other than English?
Patrick, should I answer?
Yeah, you can go, and then I'll talk a little bit about how we deal with it right now.
Yeah. So for now, most of the content that we are dealing with is in a very few languages. I think we have conferences in 3 or 4 different languages. So for us, since we're actually analyzing the documents and really extracting all the bits and pieces that we find on posters and presentation, and try to actually increase the value of the documents by actually creating metadata structures, by understanding a little bit better what's being discussed on the poster and presentation. For us, the language is important because, you know, if we don't understand, if we don't have the right taxonomy in place, then we can't understand it. So we are trying to get into other languages step by step, but for now it's still rather limited.
And
yeah, so that.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, just to add to that. So we haven't explored it for posters per se. But right now on our digital library site, we have the Google Translate widget, which again, for publishers who might be on the call, super cool widget to, add to your digital library platform. And what it does is it renders anything that's full text HTML into any language real time. So what we found is, you know, we obviously have our full text HTML for all of our papers, but it also renders all of our transcription and closed captioning on our presentation recordings as well, which is incredibly valuable. You know, we have a huge audience where English is their second language. We also have a huge number of presenters where English is their second language. You know, so we encounter accents that are very difficult to understand, folks that speak very quickly, and being able to take, you know, that transcription or that closed captioning and render it into other languages allows people to engage more effectively with the content. So like I said, we're still in the early stages building out, you know, our solution with Morressier, but, you know, making sure that all of our content is accessible to a wide audience is something we take very seriously. So it'll definitely be something that we keep an eye on moving forward.
Excellent. And then we have a question from Martin Yeagerhorn. Pat, he's asking, he said, you know, this sounds really valuable for researchers and a great service to the SPIE community. But then some question about, of course, you know, how does SPIE see, you know, financing this? Obviously, it's something that comes with some costs. So what is the kind of, you know, business model proposition? And is that something that would work for smaller societies as well?
Yeah, I think you just have to be creative. So, you know, we're still working out the details on the Morressier solution. I can speak to our presentation recording solution, which costs us hundreds of thousands of dollars a year to produce. And what we did when we were looking to finance that project is we looked at areas that we could save costs. And basically to finance that program, we eliminated all of our print proceedings and our CD-ROMs. So all the production costs that we were eating, you know, to produce that material. And in many cases, that material was, you know, included as part of the conference experience. And it wasn't something that we were necessarily, you know, getting clear revenue back from, or there was, you know, not really clear ROI. We were able to, you know, shift those dollars into something that we thought would be more meaningful long-term. And I think that's an important thing, right? We're talking about, you know, shifting, you know, strategies and creating a digital strategy. So I think one of the big things is when you're looking at building out new enhancements and building out new product or service offerings, you know, as much fun as it is to explore, you know, those new options, I think it's as important to explore what you're doing that's kind of archaic and see if you can repurpose some of that, some of those dollars and some of that time to do something that will be more meaningful long-term and serve you better in the future.
Yeah, excellent. And Sami, do you want to speak to that at all? I mean, I know from the benefit of our conversations that, you know, being able to provide solutions for, you know, not just the SPIEs of the world, but also smaller societies that are struggling with the same issues, but perhaps don't have the resources available is something that's really important to Morressier.
Yeah. So what we have identified is basically three main paths that you know, we've seen in action, and that people are, you know, that we're discussing quite regularly with a lot of people. One is rather, you know, from a traditional element, everything that is around sponsoring and branding. So, you know, there's a lot of components that people brand. I've showed the kiosks. There's a lot of opportunities for exhibitor to actually put their logo on the kiosk. Everything around offline branding, but also online branding is one path that we are exploring quite regularly. The second element that we're exploring is packaging the content and making meaningful thematic topic clusters that you know, can be either sold to companies, to industry player, you know, in a very traditional way. So that's one that we're developing quite often. And then the last one, which is something that obviously emerged out of all that discussion around open access and the business models, you know, around APCs, is that we are introducing more and more something that we call a poster APC or micro payment solution, where there's a very small charge of a poster or presentation, somewhere around you know, $50, $60 to $100, $110 per document, and it is then formally published with you know, DOI, metadata structure, and so on. So these are the three elements that we are discovering more and more that a lot of societies are asking for, and then, you know, we're discussing a lot around that.
Excellent. So Samuel Cerna asks, do you imagine that other forms of presenting results will come soon as well? I'm talking about the academic set, not industrial. For instance, showing live results of experiments, such as streaming a modulator working and changing the parameters while the audience is interacting with the researchers. So that sounds very interesting. So what is perhaps on the roadmap for the future of having more kind of, you know, visually dynamic or live components?
In posters in general?
whatever I know this is an area where SPIE has certainly led in terms of having a multimedia presence on your site, far before this partnership with Morressier having,
Yes, so we support a lot of that through supplemental material at the moment. The big challenge is the technology in place, and is the ROI there? What we find is, there's a lot of cool ideas and a lot of cool services out there. The problem is, are you going to actually see a return on the investment you're making? And when I say return, that doesn't necessarily mean revenue. We could do something that's really cutting edge, display, again, interactive content like this. And if it's content that, for whatever reason, the research community just doesn't engage with, we've spent a lot of time and energy and money to come up with something that people aren't ready to embrace. So I think, we're always open to exploring things. We have dialogues going on with multiple companies about multiple enhancements all the time. And typically what our approach is something that strikes us as being really neat and something that we see as being a huge advantage of the community. We actually run that by our volunteer research leadership group, just to see if they agree with our assessment. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. And having that kind of collaborative discussion really drives our decision-making and our roadmap. So we definitely do crowdsourcing to a certain degree when we think of new enhancements to the platform. And things that we might not do doesn't mean that we're not going to do them in the future. We just feel that the timing might not be, optimal for those. So yeah, I guess just to summarize, we're open-minded, but cautiously open-minded.
And what about, go ahead.
So for us, what we are seeing more and more, and what we are also integrating into our platform, is that component of obviously virtual sessions, and we are calling them virtual sessions very deliberately, and not live streaming. So I think the question was about live streaming. So what we are trying to actually somehow slightly avoid, at least, is, we're now in, so in the beginning we talked about time zones, right? We have a couple of people from Asia, with Europe here on board, we have North America, so different time zones. So that element of live is in such a world, quite a challenging world, right? When people come together on conference, I think that's more natural and it is understandable. But so what our solution right there is to say, hey, that virtual component is something where you upload a document, where you enhance it with your virtual session, meaning a self-recorded video of you presenting your research, your poster, your presentation, whatever that is, and having then a moderated discussion around that video element. And I think that then allows for different time slots, that allows also for not cramping that discussion in 3 to 4 days, but actually enabling that discussion to keep on rolling. And these are this is the decision that we have made to implement exactly these into our platform. And we see that there's a positive feedback on exactly that thought process right here.
Yeah, and that's the approach we're actually taking with our digital forum that's going on right now. Is nothing's live streaming. It's all pre-recorded, and we have discussion forums built in. We've sat through plenty of live streamed virtual events. When they run into the 5-6 hour range, they become incredibly tedious. And, because we are an international society and we have an international reach, you don't necessarily want to inconvenience anyone. No one wants to get up at 3 in the morning and sit through a technical presentation. So the format that we're using allows them to engage, whenever is convenient for them. And there is some lag time, but you work around it.
Probably just have time for one more question, and to you, Pat, from Matt Posner. Hi, Matt. I remember meeting you at Photonics West. Matt asks, are there prospects for remote poster workshops for early career professionals that cannot travel to in-person conferences? I think that's a really good question and point about the accessibility, that even in a non-COVID world, that not everyone, especially early career researchers, can make it to the conference.
Right. Yeah, and that's something we're looking at, whether it's with posters or digital format. SPIE participates, like a lot of societies, in Research for Life. where we have programs in place for researchers in low-income countries and with folks who we know aren't going to have the luxury of, engaging with us real time in person at one of our conferences. So I think, when we talk about COVID and all of these new technologies, again, there's a real long-term opportunity to have both an on-site experience that's great for everyone who can make it, but also, build out an extension that engages people who just don't have the opportunity to participate and allow them to, interact in some form or fashion with the event that's actually happening in person. So those are all, we're talking really early stages now. Those are all the kind of ideas that come out of, pulling together solutions on the fly to deal with a difficult time.
Excellent.
Just to add on that, I think that's an absolutely important point, and we see that since we're working with a lot of partners in Asia, we have partners in Africa, and we see these questions rising more and more and more, and in all our discussions, that is a very relevant point to say, how can researchers from all around the world, no matter where they are situated, to actually participate in the overall and global kind of discussion. And I strongly believe that this time that we are in will even more lead people to exactly thoughts like that. And I think Pat already mentioned it, but I think that these thought processes are starting now, and they will not stop until we have more and more solutions that actually include every researcher around the world.
Well, thank you so much to our panelists, Pat and Sami and Michelle, and thank you so much to our attendees. I'm sorry we weren't able to get to all of the questions. Just so you know, we are recording this session and we'll be posting it. So if you want to revisit it or you want to recommend it to your colleagues, we also have our names and Twitters here. Our contact details are also online. Please get in touch with us if you have any other questions. And thank you so much for joining, and be well. Okay.
Yeah, thanks everyone. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Thank you for moderating.